And how many of you were here the last time Jane was with us? Oh, one or two of you. Okay, fine. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Well,
how long ago was it? I can't remember.
It was it 4 years ago? 4 years ago that Jane first joined us. So we got an interesting evening ahead to see how much progress she's made in the job in the next 4 years. No. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the chief nurse, Jane Cummins. Come and join me. Just while you set yourself down, of course, we couldn't put on these fabulous events and have these wonderful guests without the help of our sponsors. And there they are, Miss Maxons. And Ian, I think, is going to say a word of welcome to us.
Welcome.
Yes, and this is the first time that Ian's done this, so his whole career is hanging on this. So be nice to him. You speak to the camera. Yeah.
Thanks, Roy.
So thank you very much, and it's been fun. Oh no,
Welcome everyone. It's great to see such a fantastic turnout. I'm Ian Johnson, as Roy says. I work for IMS Maxims. We've been sponsors of HealthChats.
There is a debate about that.
And supporters of the Academy of Fabulous Stuff for some considerable time now, and we're delighted to be able to continue doing so. On behalf of IMS, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our esteemed guest this evening, Jane. And you'll also have to put up with Roy.
Yes, well done.
Give him a round of applause. There's nothing like a good introduction, and that was nothing like a good introduction. Okay, fine. Listen, you're all very welcome. Jane, it's lovely to see you again.
Lovely to see you.
I can't believe that 4 years has gone by since, and only a couple of people were here. What do you want to talk about?
I don't know, how much polish have you put on the stool?
On the stool?
It's very slippery.
Yeah, I did. Yes, we punished the ladies with the stool. Yeah, I must tell you, one of the very first, the second one we did, the second ever HealthChat we did. The guest was Claire Gerarda, who is a very well-known GP. She was very prominent in those days, and she turned up on her bicycle. Because she used to get around London on her bike. And she hacked everybody off here because she chained it to the railings outside, and Chris Ham will not have that, so there was a row over where she parked her bike, that was it. And she turned up wearing lycra. Then she disappeared into the ladies and came out wearing a fantastically silk Armani suit. You remember this? People in the audience nodding. The trouble was, it was the tiniest skirt you've ever seen, and of course, you can imagine the rest. I don't know. There were gentlemen in the first row taking tablets. It was just too much for some of the older members of the audience. But, so we learned a lot about the stools, and we've made them higher since.
Yes, we've made them higher. Yeah. That's what I've got my hands.
So, I mean, there will be a lot of people in the audience who well, the majority of us weren't here the first time. So let's just spend a minute looking back over your career, really, which has really been very interesting. I mean, was it always, bandaging up the teddy? Are you one of those nurses?
Yes and no. So yes, I was originally bandaging. Well, actually, I was bandaging my brother more than my teddies. But when I was a child, yes, I did want to be a nurse.
I'm just going to ask you if you just move the microphone a little bit further up your snug.
Is that better?
I think so. Yep, that's fine.
I think it's a shrug.
Oh, it's a shrug, did I?
Yes.
It's a shrug, sorry. Snug. You have a snug in a pub, don't you? Shrug, sorry.
Shrug, okay.
Sorry, darling, yes.
I'll just make sure I have turned it on. Yes, I have.
Yeah.
You have, because there's a comment already from Kenny Gibson, who's saying, why do nurses always make such fantastic system healthcare leaders?
Is
that
about you, Jane? Hi, Kenny.
Is that up for discussion, Kenny, or is it a given?
I think that's a rhetorical statement.
I think it's a statement of fact.
Thank you, Kenny. You are one too. Right. So I did actually start. I wanted to be a nurse when I was a child, and then, as I suppose most children do, they change their minds, they do different things. When I was a teenager, my mum was in and out of hospital quite a lot, and so I spent a lot of time visiting her when she was in, saw what people did, saw what the nurses on the ward did, and decided I wanted to change my plans and become a nurse. And I was really lucky enough at a quite young age, actually, and I was about 16 to start off with. I don't think we do that as much now. But I volunteered at a learning disability hospital, which I think in those days was more of your blog the other day about warehousing was very similar to what that was like, and it was quite shocking.
Well, I used to run one called Botley's Park, which was horrible. I mean, we managed to shift most of the, where it was appropriate, most of the residents into the community, but we used to deal very badly with those. I'm not sure we still got it right, but it was
it's
even
not as good
worse.
as it used to. It's better than it used to be, but and so I went there and volunteered there, and I also was lucky enough to volunteer at the local hospital, actually on the ward where my mum had been treated, and where subsequently I worked as a staff nurse.
Oh wow!
So that was
Where
it.
was this?
That was in Bristol.
Yeah.
One of the hospitals in Bristol. So that was my introduction. I was a 16, so I volunteered for a couple of years. Did my A levels, went into nursing, and have never regretted it.
Where did you train?
I trained in Bristol.
Yeah, and of course you got a bursary.
Well, we got paid in those days.
It's even better.
Yeah. We got paid. I remember my first take-home salary for a month was £132. So I felt.
What year did you train?
79 to 82.
Exactly the same as me, because that was almost exactly my first salary.
Well, there we go. Yeah. So that's
So
now giving away my age.
Nurses have been overpaid for some time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, we worked, and of course in those days we were part of the numbers, so we were counted as the workforce on the ward. So we were. We used to, and it wasn't always brilliant in those days. I mean, I remember as a first-year student nurse being thrown the keys and left on my own as the most senior nurse on the ward with some nursing auxiliaries with an acute medical ward, and I was just left in charge.
Well, it's quite character forming.
It was quite character forming.
Yeah.
Third-year students, we were often left in charge overnight on night duty in various different. So it's it was you definitely learnt to get used to. Responding.
Well, nurses can cope with almost anything, can't they? I mean, it is interesting, isn't it, to reflect on the differences that there are in training. I mean, there's been the argument about the extent to which nurses spend enough time on the wards. I think it's 20%. Is it?
No, it's 50%.
Is it 50? Is it? But isn't there an argument over what actually constitutes that 50%?
So there are quite a lot of guidelines and rules around the undergraduate programme now. So it's about 50% of the time spent in university and the other 50% time doing clinical practice. And that clinical practice is in and should be in a range of different settings. And it's really important that it's in a range of different settings. So really, we're really keen that student nurses, student midwives spend time both in hospitals but also in community settings, in GP practices, and see the whole system of health and care, because it's more than just working in hospitals.
I see Health Education England are just about to do a report on why we haven't got any community nurses.
Well, what
it's
they're
a
doing
bit late, isn't it?
They're doing a review of the community nurse training and what should community nurses do? How should we be educating and training community nurses in the future?
Is there that's quite, because you have to ask the question about the training of nurses. Do you have to be trained differently to be a community nurse?
It's a different setting, so you work more autonomously in patients' own homes, whether that be a care home where you go in and support the care staff, or whether it's in a patient's own home. So it's a different setting, and most community nurses work on their own, sometimes with students, sometimes with support. So there's a different level of decision-making and autonomy. And you are guests in that patient's or that person's home. So it's a completely different environment for people to work in. And
you have to be quite flexible and innovative
absolutely.
And creative, don't you? How you deal with the furniture and the cat and the dog and the...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the difference is the relationships that you can build with people and their families, I think is what is often the thing that community nurses tell me is so important.
Yeah.
It's the fact that you get to know not just the individual person that you're looking after, but also their whole family and their whole circumstances and their whole setting that they're living in.
So you see more of that, don't you, in the community than you would in perhaps a brief stay on the ward?
Yes.
Yeah. And we must. I must mention Queen's nurses, otherwise I'll get Crystal will be emailing me tomorrow. Yeah. I love. I think they're fantastic. Don't you? The way that they. I don't know what it is about, but they've all got kind of an aura about them, haven't they?
They are fantastic. And one of the things I've been lucky enough to do over the 6 years that I've been the Chief Nursing Officer is I go to the Q&I events and the award ceremony, and I have stood on the stage and I have handed out the Queen's Nurse badges to, many nurses that have become Queen's nurses, and just seeing the reaction and the joy and the sort of pride that they've got for being known as a Queen's nurse is just fabulous, and they are amazing.
There's no similar award, is there, for nurses that work in a hospital?
No, not at the moment. No. We haven't got anything similar.
Maybe there should be. It's interesting. So, so you were down in Bristol.
I was down in Bristol, as you can tell from the accent. Every now and then the Bristolian
Bristol,
accent
my
comes
lover.
out.
Yeah. And what happened then?
Well, so my first job as a nurse was in A&E. So I was an A&E nurse and absolutely loved it. So worked in emergency care for quite a lot of time. Did that in a lot of medicine. Did lots and lots of different jobs.
But A&E was very different there as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, when I did A&E first, it was still in those days called casualty. Very soon, rapidly changed that. But as a nurse in the A&E, then quite often you had sort of one doctor.
I think actually casualty is not a bad way of describing it, isn't it? Really, that's what you go if you're a casualty.
But you also go if you've got a major illness, which doesn't necessarily relate to a casualty.
Yeah. So it was all run by nurses who knew what they were doing and exhausted junior doctors.
In those days, probably, yes.
Yeah, not a great place to be, is it? Really?
But I became an A&E sister when I was 24, and then
I was quite
young. Yeah. And then the clinical nurse specialist in emergency care when I was 27. So I did quite a lot of different things.
And nurse specialist in
emergency care.
And that was unusual then, weren't they? Because there weren't many of you around.
Not in those days, because it was quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
But it was absolutely amazing. It was just such a fantastic.
I'm surprised there was a curriculum for that in those days.
Yeah, there was the EMB 199, I think it was then. So it was an absolutely amazing job, and I loved the fact that you never knew what was going to come through the doors, and you had to be able to respond quickly. You had to be calm. You had to be professional, you had to be competent at a huge range of different things. And you also were dealing people at their most vulnerable, when they were most frightened, when they didn't know what was happening. So I think it's a really good example of sort of the art, but also the science of nursing. So it's about being, really competent, your expertise in that field, but also knowing when you needed to ask for additional help. But actually having the care and compassion to mean that the families that you were with and the people that were there actually felt looked after, they felt comforted, they felt assured, and they didn't feel as frightened. And I think that was a big lesson for me, and I've kept an interest in emergency care all the way through. So I've done lots of other jobs.
And there's an inquiry now, and the Tinker Man is asked why we got so many ambulances queuing up outside A&E. Should we tell him? It's because they're very busy.
We have got too many ambulances queuing outside EDs, and a lot of that is flow through through both the departments and also through the
We've got
hospitals.
loads of examples on the academy of how people have solved it.
Yeah, and people need to do more of that. We need to learn. One of the things that I think the service and the work you do with the academy and the fab stuff, I think it really shows that people locally can make changes. And one of the biggest issues for us, I think, is how people learn from that, not just reinventing the wheel.
Do you know? I mean, I've changed my whole approach. I was talking to an audience the other day. I said I joined the NHS in 1974, and I don't know. I can't do the maths. It's too big a number. How long I've been in and around the NHS. And it's only really in the last 3 years I've realised I've wasted the last 40 years. Because I've been involved in all the major reorganisations and the Thatcher reforms and the market reforms and all the rest of it. And I suddenly realised you can't change anything top down. The only things that I've ever seen change for the better are the things that come off the academy, and people are doing it locally. It's, you know, most of the reorganisations have been a complete waste of money, and I've wasted my time, really. It's fortunate that I'm going to live until I'm 106, and I've got lots of time left.
Oh, my word.
But it is, the academy's taught me such a lot about people solving their problems locally, and how that learning is transferable, and we can change stuff.
And I think the work that you've done and other colleagues have done using social media to actually spread ideas. You know, we've done, just as an example, we did a Twitter chat a few weeks ago with the 4 chief nursing officers from the 4 countries around professionalism in nursing, which we nurses organised. And actually we had a huge amount of coverage, and it was really hard to keep going, but the impact and the reach was really significant, and we had so many different questions and thoughts and comments that were made. It was really fascinating, and we've done similar things around the image and perception of nursing, which is a programme of work that my team are working on at the moment, and we've had reach, you know, the reach from some of those comments and questions, and also ideas that people have come back with about how do we improve the perception of the nursing profession to encourage people to actually apply and stay has been phenomenal. And most of that's been done through social media.
We nurses have done a fantastic job of that. And the technology thing is interesting. I mean, I'll get back to you in a minute, but I mean, the technology is fascinating. If you look at, for example, how disruptive Babylon is being at the moment in London, and you're responsible for London at the moment, and it's driving everybody balmy. But if we are really saying to the public, we are going to put you first, no decision about me without me, you are at the centre of all we're doing, we are here to serve you, when 8,000 of them in a week say, actually, we'd quite like to see our GP on a mobile phone, it's no good us saying, oh, well, actually, you can't do that. You know, this is creating a huge tension in the system for us, isn't it?
I do think that people are increasingly aware of what digital apps, digital technology can do. AI work it's just transforming the care for people, whether that be those that have long-term conditions that need to self-care, those that actually want to access information online. So I, for example, do quite a lot of my discussions and consultations around my diabetes using Skype, and I wear a thing on my arm here which I scan, gives me my blood sugars, I upload them onto my laptop, I send them off to the hospital, I have discussions with a nurse specialist about the results, what we're doing, and I hardly ever go to the service anymore.
And which hospital is that looks after you?
St Thomas's.
Yeah.
And I do it all, the vast majority of it by phone or by Skype, and the ability to upload the data, look at it myself, I've been a diabetic for a very long time, but look at the data myself, be able to make changes in terms of how I care for myself and liaise with. You know, years ago I couldn't do that. Even when I was in the days when I used to test my blood sugar by pricking my finger, I used to get a record, but it was 4 or 5 times a day. Now I do it 15, 20 times a day, and it's just there all the time. Makes such a difference to the way you look after yourself.
Yeah, and if we're going to fill the black hole of money that there is in the NHS, I mean, it depends who you talk to, how much it is, but it's like 30 billion gap or 40 billion gap. It's not possible to resolve that financial conundrum in the life of a parliament because it's simply too much money. A large slice of it is going to have to come from how we deliver services and delivering more for less, really. I mean, to be blunt about it, and it will only be those disruptive technologies that will change the platform of care. But it is very hard. I mean, I guess if you're a diabetic and if we can't look after the chief nurse with leading edge technology, who the hell can we look after them? But it's until that is universal. What are there? 3.5 million people with diabetes in this country. By 2025, it's going to be 5 million. We haven't got a hope in hell of looking after 5 million people with diabetics turning up with their GP being sorted out. We've got to resort to those kind of technologies.
That's true. About 10% of the diabetics are type 1 and the vast majority are type 2.
Yes. We just send them to the gym, do we?
But type 2 is a really good example of where you can...
That's what Mike Dixon says.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Social prescribing.
Social prescribing.
Good luck with that.
Exercise, diet does make a difference.
Yeah.
Type 2, yeah, absolutely.
But I'll let you tell people that.
Yes.
Right. So you okay? So there you are. You're in A&E, bossing all the junior doctors. And what happened next?
Oh, I just did a variety of different jobs. I moved around. I went to different hospitals. I did some general management.
Yeah, I wanted.
And then I rebuilt a hospital.
I wanted. Oh, right. Okay. Well, I want to talk to you about the transition that you made from being a nurse into being a manager. Because it was interesting what you were saying about why you wanted to go into being a nurse and how you were influenced by your family. And you can sense there's a strong sense of vocation. It's hard to define what it is, but there's a strong sense of vocation in people who want to be nurses. And it's interesting, I think, to ask people with a strong sense of vocation, what makes you leave it behind?
Well, I don't think I've ever left nursing behind completely. So even as a business manager, general manager, director, I would still do clinical shifts. I would still go and work in the department. I would still work with the staff on the front line all the time. I think for me, there's always been, it's something about your value base, which I think is quite important. This is not about, for me, it's never been about a job title or the status or, whatever. It's about making, and I know it sounds really like motherhood and apple pie, like moaning when they're watching this, but actually this is really about making a difference. And it doesn't matter what job you do, as long as you are able to see that what you do can make a difference to people and patients and families and communities and our staff. And I think, and that's always been what I've wanted to do. And I've done it in a variety of different ways, some better than others, but I think it's really important that you stick to what made you want to go into the NHS, what made me want to be a nurse, what is my value base around wanting to do the very best I possibly can in often, and certainly over the last few years, very difficult circumstances, and never letting go of that. Because if you let go of that, then you've lost the plot and you shouldn't be doing the job.
Right, hang on to that thought, because